Why are Parajumble questions so frustrating for students? Why do they think that they need to either leave those questions or they do not see those questions to be scoring? What is the reason? Is there any valid reason for that? Well, there is to an extent, because Parajumble questions, when we look at them from the perspective of banking exams and similar exams, we see that there are 3-4 things that are very common with the Parajumble questions that students feel. That are: one, it's a speed breaker in the exam. So you are inside the exam, you are doing a lot of stuff, right? But suddenly a Parajumble question comes and it takes a lot of time and you end up wasting a lot of time there, right? So it's a speed breaker in the exam, they feel. Second, they also feel that there is no guarantee of accuracy, because even if we feel that this is right, we end up seeing that the answers are something else. And therefore, there is a feeling, predominant feeling in Parajumbles, that we can never ensure accuracy in Parajumble questions. And finally, there seems to be no technically correct way of identifying which would be the answer and which would not be the answer. So that is also there in the mind of the student. So in this session, what we will see is that we will look at whether these feelings are justified or not, and we are also going to see whether there is in reality a particular way, a perfect way of doing Parajumble questions. So what to do is what is going to be in today's session. So what to do in terms of how to handle Parajumble in the paper, and not only that, how to handle Parajumble preparation. That is also something that we would discuss today. So first we will know the right way to approach, because until and unless you know the right way to approach, the right concept, the conceptual clarity, until and unless that is there, whatever you do, you are not going to get that confidence, you are not going to get that surety that this question would be correct, right? And then what to do, that I would discuss, then what to do as a part of the preparation or as a part of, Parajumble practice, that we will discuss at the end of the class, once I have given you the right way to approach the questions, okay? And at the end, I would also share with you a bonus tip, which would, show you that a lot of times when Parajumble questions are wrong for you, it does not necessarily mean that you have done it wrong, right? So what do I mean by that? That would be there in the bonus tip, okay, right? So let's start off first with the right way to approach Parajumble questions. You see, first of all, you need to have a mindset shift. Now, what is that mindset shift? The mindset shift is that you will need to stop treating the Parajumble questions as a fully meaningful paragraph. Please understand, my dear friends, that Parajumble questions, though they obviously mean in that particular context in which they have been written, but they might not make a lot of sense in overall context because they are a part of a larger paragraph. So if you start thinking that this 4 lines together would make perfect sense together, that might not happen, and that does not happen a lot of times, and which is one of the reason of your confusion with those Parajumble questions. Okay, so that is one thing that you'll have to remember. And now comes the technique in which you to approach. The first, identify the start of the paragraph. Now, how do I identify the start of the paragraph? It's easy to say identify the start of the paragraph, but what are the things that we need to look into that we are able to identify the start of the paragraph? So these are some of the things that you can look into as a starter, so that you are able to identify the start of the paragraph, or the in those 5 lines, which can be the possible first line, that in a way which would be easier than what you do now. So first is generic or specific statement, right? If it's a generic statement or a specific statement, both extremes. Generic statement means that it's a general statement whose scope is larger, right? Though that kind of statement can be a start, or a very specific statement which whose scope is very small, because a writer writes in both the ways. either he writes from a general to specific kind of architecture, or he writes from a specific to general kind of architecture. Though that would depend, obviously, that you can only identify after you have read the whole 4-5 lines and see what kind of, what nature of writing the author is employing. But then either the most general or the specific can be an introduction. Then a new idea, if a new idea is being introduced, then that can be a good introduction. Full names, unrelated ideas, even central idea can be a good first line. But obviously there is a caveat in that, and that is that in all of these rules, it is that it has to be seen from the context of those 4 lines. It is not that always the most general statement would be the starting line. It is not that always the most specific statement would be the starting line. It is not always that a new idea that has been introduced would be the starting line. But these are indicators that give you an idea that what could be. Okay, that's the difference. You see, when we treat Parajumble rules, we treat them very strictly, and that is where students make a mistake. Parajumble, there is rule to solve, and what I will be discussing here would be all those rules to solve. But they are in that context of those 4-5 sentences that has been given. Okay. Now, third, pick up a mandatory pair or mandatory triplet. Let's say there are 5 sentences. Out of those 5 sentences, pick up those 3 sentences which would come one after the other, because the relationship between these 3 sentences are clear, and which would come earlier and which would come later is prominently visible. Now, how do we identify that? You see, cause-effect pairs. So, in one sentence, a cause has been given, and what has happened due to that has been given in the next sentence. So, that's a cause-effect pair, and there is a chance that this would be a mandatory pair, right? Okay. Second, chronology. One event has happened, let's say in 1950, another event has happened in 1970, another in 1990. So, there is very chance that they would be in order either from 1950 to 1990 or 1990 to 1950, right? Then problem solution pair, or specific to general flow or general to specific flow. So, all of these are indicators of helping you identify the mandatory pair or mandatory triplet. Obviously, it's not always necessary that there will be a mandatory pair or triplet, but most of the times, if you look carefully, we find that there had been indicators in those sentences which, if we had connected the dots, we could have found out that this sentence can only come after this sentence, right? Okay. And then eliminate option if there are any. If there are options, then eliminate those options which do not fit into the order that you have identified. Then your choices get limited to 2 or 3 options, and then you can choose out of that. And finally, you also need to identify the flow of the story. The flow of the story is that you think yourself in the shoes of the writer, and see when you would have written, what you would have kept first and what you would have kept later on. But normally what I have seen is that in the exams, we really get questions which cannot be solved from B and C. And if there is obviously questions which are without options, where the options have not been given, right? There you cannot eliminate option. There identifying start and picking up mandatory pair and triplet helps, but at the end of the day, the final answer depends upon the flow of the story. So there obviously your arresting the flow of the story becomes important. As a matter of fact, if you see, when we talk about identifying start or picking mandatory pair or triplet, there also you are going with the flow of the story, and then only you are able to find out the start or mandatory triplet. But when I say in the point E, arresting the flow of the story, that means the overall story, how it would start, and of those 4 lines, how it would start and how it would end, right? That gives an additional clarity to you that how they would come down to. And so this is the right way. This is the way in which it happens. And you know what? Unless you use these to solve questions, how would we know that these are useful or not? Right? What we can do is that we can take 3-4 questions and apply these and see whether it works in solving the questions, or whether it saves time, whether our accuracy improves or not, right? And that's what we'll do. And for that, what we will do is we will take previous year questions, some previous year questions, and do that. And I have mixed up the types. Some of them are easy, some of them are a little challenging, some of them are with option, and one is without option. So these things I have done so that we are able to apply them in variety of areas and see whether it is applicable in all kind of scenarios, right? So let's start. But before we start, I'll want to show you one thing that you need to remember. Now, these rules are not a list of priority. That means you do not do one first and do the other later. Just like I said, arresting the flow of the story was already being done when we were trying to identify the start and picking the mandatory pair. So what that essentially means is that all of these can be done together, right, simultaneously. And that's the trick of doing a Parajumble question. That is the trick to doing Parajumble question. If you are not able to do them simultaneously, you would not get that clarity, you would not get that confidence, and you will take a lot of time also. Okay, right. So this is not a serial wise rule. This is a rule set that has to be applied simultaneously on the whole question, and that requires a lot of practice, but it is doable, and I'll show that to you in a moment in all the questions that we would be taking, right? So let's start. With all of these questions, I have given the time that you should take to solve these questions, because you see, we would know whether this question takes more time or not only when we know what it is supposed to take, right? So this question is not supposed to take more than 45 seconds. So pause the lecture and try it out by yourself. Done? Okay, this was an easy question. You don't need these rules to solve this, because even if you have read it, you would have able to do this. And this is not a parajumble, this is a sentence jumble, right? Two sentences have been given which have been jumbled. So obviously when a sentence is jumbled, that means the phrases inside the sentence are jumbled, which is easier to solve to an extent than a paragraph which has 4 or 5 sentences. So we'll start off with the first question here. To work smoothly with professionals such as lawyers and accountant, corporations can use the internet who remain outside the company walls. So this is what has been given here. So if I see here, what could start? You see, even if you look at here, we could have identified the start with what we have learned today only, right? This is what is introducing the idea, which are corporations. So corporations can use the internet. Now for what? To work smoothly with, so there is a cause and effect kind of scenario. So to work smoothly, so B would come first and then A, and with whom? Now who remain outside the company walls, so BAC. So obviously this helps, but without that also you could have done it. So BAC, now is one BAC, one BAC. So there are two options, option number 1 and option number 3. Now the second one, impact of terrorism in particularly local economy, the long term, hard on the poor and on the, so obviously this one, hard on the poor and on the local economy, is mandatory pair, because only one thing can come here, and that is local economy. So we know for sure that GE is a mandatory pair. So if I go back to the options, I can eliminate the option 1 from here and I can mark option 3, right? But let's say you are not very convinced. So you can also make the whole stuff, and that is the long term impact of terrorism, because this long term can only go with the impact of terrorism is particularly hard on the poor and on the local economy. This makes FDGE the perfect answer, and that is this one. So option 3 would be your answer, right? Next question now. Question number 2. So I'll give the concepts in front of you so that you are able to solve this, keeping these things in mind. So do this question now, question number 2. Done? Okay. 45 seconds to 1 minute you should have taken. Now let's see. For instance, it changed the very laws of the land. It does not seem to be one that would start, because it is talking about an example. Okay. Every policy was geared towards the strengthening and expansion of British capitalism. So we are talking about British capitalism or British people that we know now. It changed not just land ownership laws, but decided even what crops ought to be grown and what not to be. Right. Now, if I look at the sentence C and sentence A, they are related. It seems that C will be following A. It seems, right? Whether it would be immediately following A or not, we don't know, but C would be after A. In contrast, British colonialism, which was based on a capitalist system, directly interfered to ensure the greatest profit and benefit to British capitalism. Okay, now in these two sentence D as well as sentence B, we are talking about British capitalism and its expansion, right? And in the sentence A and C, we are talking about the law of land, how it is being changed. So these are two same kind of, pairs, A, C and B and D, right? So what do we do? Now, if you have noticed, the kind of sentences B and D are more general than A and C. These are more specific. These are specifically saying that what changes have been done to the laws of land by them, right? What kind of changes have happened. So this is more specific data. This is more general statements. So, and the specific has come with for instance, which is an example. So when I give a general rule, then only after that, when I give a specific example of it, I use for instance. So it seems that the specific would come later and general first, right? Now in general, between B and D, which would come first? Now here, if I look at, no one qualifies from the perspective of the rules that we have done, no one qualifies as pure introduction. So what do we do? This is where your mindset change would help you. You know that this is an excerpt. This is something that has come out of a larger paragraph, and therefore it is not necessary that the introduction would look like a standard introduction of a paragraph, right? And therefore on the basis of the given sentences, you would decide that which one should go first. And on that, if you look at, every policy was geared towards strengthening can only come after this, because British colonialism, which was based on a capitalist system, directly interfered to ensure the greatest profit, is a more general statement than B. So D should precede B, and then we would talk about that they changed the laws. For instance, they changed the laws, which is less general than D and B, but more general than C, because C talks about the laws they have changed, specifically about the laws. So DBAC, which is this option, right? Okay. So this is your answer. Now, could I have done it with elimination of option? Obviously, yes. But I took the opportunity to explain this question so that your clarity is crystal clear in this, and you're able to follow the argument, the flow of argument that I am applying to solve these questions. Clear? Right? Because having clarity would help. So what would be the answer? The answer would be option number 2. Now, the next question number 3. So again, a 45-second to 1 minute question. I'll give you the reference of the rules in front of you so that you can take help from them. Okay, I missed the instruction in here. The instruction here is that you will have to rearrange the ones that are not in bold. So A, C, D, E, F, G have to be rearranged in the right order. The bold one, that is B, is the first sentence of the paragraph. So what is happening here? The first sentence of the paragraph has been given to you, which is B, which is bold, and you will have to arrange the rest ones. Okay. So take 45 seconds to 1 minute and do this question. Done? Okay. Fantastic. So let's look at the answer. How would we approach this? More than answer, what is important is the logic through which you would be able to solve this question. So the start is given here. Now I'll read the start also first. The opinion of the International Court of Justice in The Hague that Britain's continued administration of the Chagos Archipelago is unlawful is stunning. So this is the issue. Issue is International Court of Justice has given an opinion that British is continuously administrating Chagos, and that is not lawful, right? And this opinion, according to whoever has written is stunning. Opinion itself is surprising. Okay, right? Now, I'll start with A. Britain's reaction, however, was predictable and disappointing. See, since the late 1960s, the US has maintained a military base on one of them, Diego Garcia. Where from US has come, we do not know. One of them can be one of the islands of Chagos. Mauritius has made it clear that it does not intend to jeopardize the future of military base. So Mauritius is the new player again, right? So Britain was the first main player because the International Court of Justice talked about it, right? And Britain has been referred here also. But then there are two players again, US and Mauritius. It is a landmark in the effort to decolonize the Indian Ocean and return the island to Mauritius. Okay, so this island most probably belongs to Mauritius, and that's what the International Court of Justice was trying to do, returning it to Mauritius. In 2016, Britain extended the lease to the US till 2036, even as it said it would return the islands to Mauritius when no longer needed for defense purposes. Right. So here there is a contrast. Britain extended the lease to US. Now Britain and US has been connected. So here, since the late 1916, US has maintained military base on Diego Garcia. That means that it is one of the islands of Chagos, and it is Britain who is giving this lease to US, and it has renewed it till 2036. Even when it had said that it will return when no longer needed for military purpose. It said that the ICJ is an advisory opinion. It will examine and stressed the security significance of the island. Okay. Now, who said this? So, only because the talk is between ICJ and Britain, no one else is saying anything. So, this it said has to be Britain, right? Okay. Now, Britain's reaction, however, was predictable and disappointing. Who has reacted? In which sentence Britain's reaction is visible? Only in G. So, A, G is a mandatory pair. Britain's reactions you said, and then you gave the reaction. That is a mandatory pair. Okay. Now, it is landmark in the effort to decolonize the Indian Ocean and return the islands to Mauritius. This can come directly after B, or this would come at the end. Right. So, there are two positions for this. Either this would come, E would come directly after B, second sentence, or it would come at the end. Then, since the late 90s, now here you see chronology. In 2016, Britain extended the base. So, you can only extend when you have given it. So, C chronologically is first and then later on F. So, CF is again a mandatory pair. So, CF is another mandatory pair. So, they see we are able to identify the mandatory pairs on this. Here, introductory statement has already been given. So, we do not need to do that. But yes, the second sentence would act as an introductory statement here. So, we'll have to identify that. So, CF is a mandatory pair. AG is a mandatory pair. Where can you find them? You can find them in option number 2. You can find them in only option number 2. So, option number 2 has to be the answer if you have identified two mandatory pair. This is how you will save time and answer the question and move ahead. You see, I took 1.5-2 minutes to explain to you the whole stuff. If you are reading it and doing it in this way, you will be able to do it within 45 seconds, 1 minute. But the condition is that when you have got the two mandatory pairs, you check out with the options and eliminate the other option. And if you are left with one option, why would you go further and do the whole stuff? I'll do that for you because I want to explain it to you and you have, so that you have complete clarity. But in the exam, you might as well skip that. Okay, right? So AG and CF are mandatory pair. Now, Mauritius has made it clear that it does not intend to jeopardize the future of the military base. Now, if you look at it, now where do I place Mauritius? AG and CF, what would come first and what would come later? Let me see. Britain's reaction has to be registered first. Then it said that ICJ's advisory, it will examine. And on the other hand, it says that what it has actually done since late 1960s, it has given to US and it has renewed the lease also. So, AGCF should come together. Now, if you look at E in this new perspective, E makes more sense at the start rather than at the end. It is a landmark in the effort. When you have already talked about what has Britain done, after that, saying that it is a landmark effort on the part of ICJ does not make a lot of sense. Before that, it makes sense, but not after. So, E has to come first, and if E comes first, obviously the D would then come at the end. Mauritius has made it clear it does not intend to jeopardize the future of the military base, would come at the end. Okay, right? Is it clear now? So, E, A, G, C, F, D is the right one, and that is the answer also, but we could have answered it much before that without identifying the right positions of E and D. So, that was the third question, my friends. Now, we will move on to the last question of the day. Question number 4. This is a question without any options. So, without any options question, what kind of questions you get? You get questions like, which would be the first sentence, which would be the second sentence, kind of that. So, there are no options on the basis of which you can eliminate the options and find out the answer. So, you'll have to solve the whole thing. Obviously, it is more time consuming than the ones that are option based, and a lot of times more confusing also. But here, your rules, your techniques would help you most. So, try and solve this question. 1 minute 30 seconds take. Right. Now, let's dive into this question and see how we can solve it. Self-management is thus defined as the individual's ability to manage the symptoms, treatment, physical and psychological consequences and lifestyle changes inherent in living with a chronic condition. So, it says is thus defined as. So, obviously self-management has been introduced earlier, therefore, they would define it. Most people with progressive diseases like dementia prefer to have control over their own lives and healthcare for as long as possible. This seems to be a generic statement. This can be a start. But we'll read the whole stuff. Having control means, among other things, that patients themselves perform self-management activities. Now, having control here is referring to this having control. So, obviously 3 would come after 2, which would come whether 2 would be the first sentence or not, we will see. Whether 3 would be immediately after 2 or not, that we will see after we have read the whole stuff. We will not, decide in between. Supporting people in decisions and actions that promote self-management is called self-management support, requiring a cooperative relationship between the patient, the family and the professionals. So, if you look at 4 would follow thereby 1. As 3 is following 2, by the same logic 4 will follow 1. Why? Because there is a flow of the story, and in the flow of the story, even from mandatory pair wala concept also, if you can see that what is happening, you have introduced what is self-management, you are defining self-management, and then only you would talk about self-management support system. When you have people trying to manage by themselves, then only you will later on talk about that how would you support those people who are trying to self-manage, right? So, in the flow of the story, 4 would definitely come after 1, right? So, it seems that 2, 3 are related, 1, 4 are related. So, 2 mandatory pair is there in front of us. How do we identify that this is mandatory pair? Because 1, 4 are related, they would come together. 2, 3 are related, they would come together. Now, I have to make, space them or place them. Which would come first? Which pair would come first? Definitely 2, 3 pair, because 2, 3 pair is talking about problem. And 1, 4 pair is talking about solution, right? So, the problem would come and then a solution. Hence, your answer would be 2, 3, 1, 4. Clear? Right? So, you saw how getting organized in the approach would help you, and especially in without option questions, do not decide on your answers before you have read the whole stuff. With option wale questions also, do not decide if you have not read the whole stuff, because it might give you an idea which is partial in nature, and you might be biased towards it. Okay, right. So, those were the questions. We applied the things that we learned in this class on the questions, and that is why I said that in today's introduction session, we would understand how exactly we can approach the questions of Parajumble, and we probe it also with questions actually from previous year. The first 3 questions were from SBI PO and IBPS PO. The last version was a CAT question. Okay, so all kind of questions, and all of the questions were of different nature. So all kind of questions from different exams, from SBI PO to IBPS PO to CAT, we were able to solve, right? Now let's address the frustrations you have. Are they speed breaker in the exams? Now, not really, right? You see, on an average, you should have taken 45 seconds to 1 minute for all the 4 questions. So 4 minutes, within 4 minutes, all the 4 questions could have been done. So are they really a speed breaker? They are not. We feel it so because we are doing it in the wrong way. Achha. No guaranteed accuracy. Yes, I agree to this point that you cannot be very sure about whether your answer is correct or not. And I told you that in the bonus point, I will tell you that why that is the case sometimes. But, you know, the problem or the nature of not having a guaranteed accuracy is as much as in other questions also. It is not that Parajumble is more unlikely to be inaccurate, right? If you're doing them in the right way, Parajumble has also the same level of accuracy as the other questions of English or reasoning would be. Then thirdly, there seems to be no way to identify things in Parajumble. That we saw that it is completely wrong. We have ways to identify. We have proper techniques in which we can approach the questions, right? Now, what should you do now? Now you know the right way to approach. What next? I told you at the end of the session, I'll tell you what next. Apply these on questions you practice. Whenever you practice, you see, it will take practice. Applying questions simultaneously, all the rules in questions is something that would take practice. Okay. And this practice should be at least for 40 to 50 different types of questions, preferably from kind of questions that comes in exam, right? And now comes the bonus. You see, bonus tip, I told you that sometimes the problem is not in you. It is the question itself, right? You see what happens in mocks, especially in mocks, not in actual exam. You see, you thought that this should be the order and you see that the question maker has given this to be the answer. Now, why does that happen? Normally, what we have seen is that the mocks take the questions, take the paragraph, and let's say there are 10 lines to that paragraph. They take the first line, then the third line, then the fifth line and the seventh line, and they make a question. Now, whenever you are eliminating lines from in between, then what is happening? The idea's consistency according to the author, the original author that has written it, now is broken. Now there can be multiple way of looking at it, right? And that's what happens. So, sometimes if you feel that this Parajumble question, my answer can also be correct, that can also be from the fact that the question makers of the mocks have employed this technique to make the question, and therefore the question now can be treated in 2 ways, right? Okay, so don't be very harsh on yourself. Ask your teacher, mentor, or in the group, for example, in our study group, students ask these kind of questions, and then we can discuss, and then they would know that this is not their problem. Similarly, you also ask people who know, people who would be able to guide you, that how is it for this reason, or I am technically I am wrong, right? This and if you know that, you will criticize yourself less and you will feel more comfortable with Parajumble, right? So these are the only things that you need to do. So that will be all for today. Hope you like this class. Thank you very much and all the best.